Wow, that was my first time ever seeing like that sort of countdown thing. That's very dramatic. Good job. I feel like I should like almost like run in, like rah, like a boxer into a ring. Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. Good night, wherever you might be. My name is Maria, and today is the second part of my three-part series on Harvard Business School. And so let's just jump right in. And let me pull up the thing and share the screen. You know how it goes. Well, do I know how it goes? Oh, there we go. Aha. Okay, so last week we talked a little bit about Harvard Business School. Instead of giving you a complete overview of things that I think you are smart enough to Google yourself, I decided to focus on what I think are the most germane or relevant things you should know about Harvard, what I think makes it special, but also what it isn't. And so what we're going to talk about today, I asked you guys to put your questions in the comments of the last video. And so a lot of people were saying, well, I want to have a sense of like who gets into Harvard to begin with, like what are they looking for? What sorts of people get in? And then how can we think about trying to show that we are that type of person through our application? So that is what I am going to cover today. For those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, hi, I'm Maria Wich-Vila. I'm a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School, and I'm the founder of ApplicantLab.com, which is disrupting the expensive MBA admissions consulting industry. Most other people with my level of expertise and caliber charge a minimum of $350 an hour up to $500 an hour. I think that's ridiculous, so I created an online tool called ApplicantLab.com. It guides you through everything you need to know for a small fraction of the price. And in fact, as a GMAT Club member, there's actually a 10% off discount that you can get. So it's even less expensive for you. Lots of people love it. And I think one thing I wanted to talk about that I don't often bring up during this little introductory spiel is that I think there's this idea that, oh, if I sign up for Applicant Lab, there's not going to be a real person there helping me. It's just the software and me by myself with the software. And that is actually not true. We have a support inbox. I actually man the support inbox along with my colleague, Karin. And in fact, if you use Applicant Lab, you can then have a friend help you run through your materials. At the end, I have checklists inside that they can use. I actually there are Applicant Lab alumni who used the lab, went to business school, graduated, and now they've come back and they're helping do affordable services like resume reviews and essay reviews and mock interviews. Or you can always use Applicant Lab with a third-party consultant, perhaps buy a few a la carte hours with another, I am so sorry, perhaps buy a few a la carte hours with another consultant, or buy like a one school package with them and then use Applicant Lab for the rest. So there are so many different ways you can use the lab, but no matter how you use it, even if it's just an insurance policy, if you buy an expensive package with someone else and you just want to bounce some of their advice off of another expert, consider it an insurance policy for your other admissions consulting package. Okay, so, look, if you're in a hurry, you got things to do and people to see. Here's my entire presentation in one image. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? I think that there tends to be a misconception out there that, well, I'm sort of this, I'm not necessarily like the best egg out there, but if I get into Harvard Business School, they're going to transform me into this amazing chicken, an award-winning championship chicken. But in fact, Harvard does provide a lot of transformational education and they do really help you grow, but it's not that they turn a regular egg into a championship chicken. They are looking for championship eggs to begin with. They are trying to maximize the probability that every egg they pick is the probability is as maximum as possible that person is going to become a championship chicken. So it's not about like, oh, I want them to turn me into this amazing leader. It's you're already an amazing leader. And so Harvard wants to help you become an even better leader. Or the other way to put it, I originally made this the last slide, and then I was reviewing my stuff, and I was like, actually, this should go at the beginning. So just super quickly, I think there are some people in the applicant pool. I would estimate, say, 2 to 3% of the applicant pool. They already have such incredible leadership accomplishments that they're going to, they could submit sort of like a crayon essay on the back of a napkin, and they would probably get in. I think this is about 2 to 3% of the people. There are some people who honestly will probably never get in. They could submit the most beautiful Pulitzer Prize winning essay in the world, but because of other factors in their candidacy, they're really not going to be competitive no matter what. I'm sorry if that's sort of disheartening, but it is true. I think this is about 30% of the applicant pool. And look, I would have loved to become an Olympic volleyball player. I'm only 5 feet tall, so that's not going to happen. I would also love to be the next Mrs. George Clooney. That's probably not going to happen. And so, like, I'm just telling it to you straight, right? But then most people, the remainder, I think, are somewhere in the middle where I think a lot of people are qualified to get in and they have the potential to get accepted. However, the challenge for them is how do they tell their story in a way that the admissions committee is going to find compelling, that the admissions committee is going to say, you know what, let's bring this person in. I want to meet them. Let's bring them in for the interview, right? Because once you get to the interview stage, you've got about a 50-50 shot of getting in. So most people are in the middle. If you're watching this, you're probably somewhere in this little purple box. And so that is what we're going to focus on today. So you might have seen, I have another presentation where I talk about the Adcom hierarchy of needs, where, you know, the things that they look for are the academics are first, then emotional maturity, employability, and leadership potential. Leadership potential is the thing that really separates the different candidates who get into the different schools. And we know that's true because if we look at the academic profiles and the academic achievements of most people getting into these top programs, they're pretty similar, right? Especially if we focus on the GMATs, you know, 733, 727, 722. And when you actually look at what that difference means in terms of percentile, it's really almost no real difference, right? You go anywhere from 94th percentile to 96th percentile. I mean, it's not like a dramatic difference. And so if you look at it purely on academics, most of the top programs are attracting people who have pretty similar, if not nearly identical, academic prowess. And yet, if you look at some of the acceptance rates, the acceptance rates vary pretty wildly. So last year, Stanford was at about 9%. Harvard's usually around 9%. Stanford is normally around 6%. I think COVID last year was just a wild card. And yet some of the other programs have a 20% or almost even going up to the high 20s in terms of percentage acceptance rate. And also like the profiles of people who tend to get into, say, a Harvard, Stanford are a little bit more, it's a little bit more competitive to get into a Harvard or Stanford than it is to get perhaps into another program. And it's not because of the GMAT, it's because of these other things sort of at the top of that Adcom hierarchy of needs pyramid that I like to talk about. So the difference is the leadership potential, or what I also like to call the front page of Fortune magazine. So what they are hoping for, and they know they're not going to get it, but in an ideal world, every admissions officer's dream is to admit someone to the class who is going to go to the school, love the school, graduate, become some sort of well-respected and admired luminary. Doesn't have to be in the business world, could also be in the nonprofit sector, maybe even some cases in the government sector, but someone who is going to be respected and looked up to. So then that way, when people read that article in Fortune magazine or Wired magazine or what have you, and they say, oh, such and such person went to such and such school, it gives glory for the school's brand. They realize that not everyone's going to become a Sheryl Sandberg, but they're hoping that everyone is, or at least has the potential to become someone who becomes like a well-respected and looked up to person in their field. And so how do they try to figure out who's the most likely person to end up on the cover? Well, in the absence of any other data like a crystal ball or a time machine, they look at your past performance and past actions. Now, these are an imperfect predictor of success, but they're the best possible predictor we have. So the sort of person who makes good things happen now is likely to become the sort of person who makes good things happen later, and then the cycle continues, right? So they're looking for people who have been making good things happen for a while, and then in the hopes that this is just sort of a natural part of who they are and it will progress from there. So when I talk about leadership potential, let's talk a little bit about what leadership potential isn't, because I think that's almost just as good or informative as talking about what it is. So if you're wondering like, wow, this seems sort of like an arbitrary thing, how do they try to figure out who's who and who's going to do what? Because they have decades and decades and decades of alumni records, and they track these records, and they track things like, what was this person's GMAT score? And is GMAT score a predictor of future classroom success? And is GMAT score a predictor of future income? And like they do all these sorts of studies, and they're constantly tracking their alumni data. And so when they track their data, they find out a couple of things. Professional success is not necessarily about IQ, a pure sheer brainiac genius. I mean, we've all known people who are probably geniuses, but who can't talk to another person. Or are so off-putting in how arrogant they are that you want to leave the room whenever they enter the room. So that's not great for leadership. So by the way, do not waste time in your application spending a lot of effort trying to prove how smart you are. Not necessary. It also isn't about individual excellence. Leadership is not about like, I went off by myself and I locked myself in a cave and I solved this amazingly complicated algorithm and, I'm a genius. The problem is that very few people make it to the top by themselves. Even these charismatic celebrity leaders that we have in society, like an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos or whatever, like they didn't get there by themselves. They hired a ton of people to help them build their companies. And so you need to be able to work with others and bring out the best in others in order to become successful. And it certainly isn't about doing the absolute bare minimum, clocking in at 9 a.m., leaving at 6 p.m., never lifting a finger to do anything beyond what is expected or asked of you. Because in the future, people, whether those people are your bosses, your clients, your investors, everyone likes someone who goes above and beyond. that gains loyalty, and it gains good feelings and goodwill. And so people who just sort of have a history of like, well, I went to this college and I majored in this because it was expected of me, and that's all I did. And then I went to this job, and what was expected of me were these 3 things, and those were the only 3 things I did. And as soon as I could leave, I got out of there, and I, never lifted my head up to look around to try to take on more responsibility. Like those sorts of folks, that's not leadership potential. And one thing I like especially about the way that Harvard phrases it in their materials is that they don't just say, well, we're looking for leaders. They specifically phrase it as, we're looking for people who have demonstrated a habit of leadership. And I love the word habit, because a habit is something that you can try to cultivate, but it's also something that you almost don't have conscious control over. Right? If you have a habit of, I don't know, getting up in the morning and making a smoothie and running 5 miles, you're a better person than I am. But if you have that sort of habit, you're like on automatic pilot when you do it on some level. And so what I love about the word habit of leadership is that it's almost like there's something inside of you that makes you incapable of just sitting back and being like, well, that's a dumb idea, but I'm just going to, whatever, I'm going to let them fail and crash and burn on their own. And I'm not going to raise my hand or say a word. They can go ahead and no, like, it's almost like you can't just sit back and see something that's suboptimal and not say anything about it. You almost can't help yourself but jump in and be like, oh my gosh, guys, like, let's do this. Or have we thought about this? Or like, don't really know that this is the right idea. How about if we do something different? So it's almost like they're looking for evidence that it's just kind of it's not something you're doing because you're like, I have to get into business school, therefore I must do something that is leadership work. No, it's almost like business school has nothing to do with it. Like, you just sort of are like, that's just who you are. You jump in and you make things happen. Which is why only having just one big leadership accomplishment under your belt may not be enough for a Harvard or Stanford. It might be enough for some of the other excellent schools, excellent candidates going to excellent schools, but the bar is higher in terms of demonstrating leadership over many phases of your life, and not just like in the past 6 months. And so one of the ways that leadership is ascertained is who has moved the biggest mountain, right? So that's sort of a figure of speech to move a mountain. And so it's not just about me by myself pushing the mountain. It's about me getting other people and convincing them of something along the way so that we all move the mountain together. The thing I want you to focus on is that it's much more about the impact you have on others and your ability to influence them and influence positive outcomes, as opposed to sheer problem solving. right? It's not about like, oh, here's a calculus problem and I solved it and the derivative of 2xy is what. No, like it's it's more about this people skills of getting other people to help you move a mountain together, or convincing them to even scale the mountain to begin with. Or once you get up the mountain, what's the best way to get down? Well, let's work together and figure that out. So it always involves other people. And it's more about showing that you're the sort of person who can make things happen through others, and not just like you being a stampeding elephant barging through something and making it happen all by yourself. So I'm gonna give you a few. These are illustrative purposes only. I put that in italics to really emphasize it. This is just to give you like a gut feeling sense. It's not a hard or fast like cutoff rule, ones and zeros, binary. It's sort of it's a spectrum. So sort of like the smallest, most basic level is somebody who shows up on time. They do a competent job. They're managing a team maybe, but there's no real obstacle. There's no real innovation. It's just like, this is a job that our company has had for 20 years. And the last 5 people who have had this job are doing it the exact same way you're doing it. And it's pretty easy. And as long as you get the TPS reports in on time, everyone's happy. And it's just kind of, honestly, kind of boring and kind of a rote job, which is fine. But perhaps that's kind of like one of the lower levels. The next sort of level, a slightly bigger mountain, is if you're helping a team overcome some sort of a setback. Right? I don't know what the setback could be, all kinds of things, but if there's some sort of a setback or a challenge and you help a group of people overcome that challenge, that is a more impressive mountain to scale. Note that you don't have to be the person formally in charge of others to make that happen. In fact, sometimes it's even more impressive if you're not the person in charge and you are able to influence others to work together or to solve a problem or to change their approach or whatever. The next level for me is the ability to impact a powerful internal group over whom you have no direct control. So somebody above you or somebody in another department. Because it's one thing to say like, well, I'm going to impact the person who reports to me because if they don't do what I say, they know I'm going to, I might fire them. And so of course they're going to do whatever I tell them. That's not as impressive because, anyone with power could just order the person underneath them to do something. It doesn't mean they're a good leader. It just means they have power. But so if you are able to show that you've impacted someone over whom you have no direct authority, that's like the next level. And if that's like an internal person, like let's say there's a SVP or some sort of VIP in your company that you're able to persuade to do something differently, that's a bigger mountain. The next biggest mountain is impacting a powerful external group, so that you have even less control over someone who is, let's say, a client or a vendor, right? External people. So internal influence and external influence. And then sort of like the tallest mountain is being able to impact an entire industry or perhaps a government. So in my experience, let's assume there's a candidate with whatever that average GPA, 3.6 and a 730 GMAT. And let's assume the thing that separates the people who get into the more rigorous to get into school, not that the school itself is more rigorous, but the getting in is harder, are the people who are more on the right-hand side of the screen, right? And don't say like, well, I haven't impacted a government, that's it, I'm screwed. No, this is just sort of, again, for illustrative purposes. Remember how I said a minute ago, like the sort of like 2 to 3% that I think are sort of automatically going to get in pretty much? Those are the people who are all the way over on this biggest mountain. But there's not a lot of them, so don't be discouraged. There's only so many of them, and some of them are jerks, so they shoot themselves in the foot. So don't be discouraged. But if ideally you will be somewhere between these three mountains on the side. So for example, in tech, the lowest mountain is if you do QA, or if you're simply like coding. Somebody else tells you, I want you to build this code, and you build the code and you don't suggest anything on your own. You just follow orders and do as you're told. Probably not getting into an elite business school, a top business school. If you lead a team, let's say there's a deadline and you need to get the app launched by May 1st or whatever. Okay, that's good. That's the next level. A higher level would be convincing your company CEO to launch a new product or to change strategic direction. The next level would be of external influence, would be maybe convincing a venture capitalist to invest that wasn't going to invest. And then all the way on the biggest mountain would be maybe saying, I'm going to start the anti-bias in AI organization, and we're gonna become an industry-leading organization and group, and we have 3,000 members. We're all AI scientists, and we have signed a commitment that we will be aware of gender and racial bias in AI and blah blah blah. So like setting up something that impacts the entire industry, and then getting featured in Wired magazine or whatever. Don't worry, not a lot of people are all the way on that right-hand side mountain. I'm just, again, illustrative purposes of how that spectrum might look. An example from sort of the banking world along the same lines. All the way at the sort of the left-hand side, if you're simply someone who is entering in client trade orders, or you're overseeing compliance, like people send you papers and you're like, these numbers add up, check, right? That's great. You're providing good value for your company, but you're not really pushing that mountain forward. You're not really pushing the envelope. I know that's an overused phrase, but you're not really moving things or changing things. You're just sort of doing your job in a competent way. And by the way, like people on the left, they get into business schools, but we're talking about Harvard today. So probably not going to get into Harvard if you're on the left. Leading a team to, let's say your bank is giving out loans for small businesses, and the process is really like heavy with paper and mistakes, and you figure out a way to digitize it and it's better. Great, you're helping your team solve a problem. The next level, though, would be to convince the head of the bank or someone senior within the bank to start giving out more loans to, let's say, women-owned businesses. The next level would be external influence, maybe convincing a client that was not going to do a certain merger or acquisition and convincing them to do it or to rekindle a deal that had been dead. And then the biggest mountain is, say, convincing a government of a developing country to set aside $100 million pool of incubation investment for small business entrepreneurs. In the years that I've been doing this, I've only met like 2 people who are all the way on the I've convinced a government to set up a fund to help entrepreneurs. There's not a lot of them out there, but that is sort of like the pinnacle of really impacting. The amount of impact goes beyond you, your team, your company, your clients, and it goes to like a much broader scope of impact. Now, the good news is the mountains that I just talked about can be viewed in context. So the admissions officers, it's not just about who made the biggest deal or who managed the biggest team. The admissions officers are familiar with different mountains. So they know, for example, that if you work at a certain type of company, especially if that company is a pretty large one, and that is a company that doesn't really promote people, or that's a company where if you're a junior person and you suggest to the CEO a new strategy, you're going to get fired, they're more likely to be aware of that. And by the way, your recommender can be a big help for you here in saying, like, look, in our business, we just don't really promote people, and it has nothing to do with her. We love her. She's great. But so first of all, the context in which you are moving this mountain does get taken into consideration. So whether you are leading a big, glorious team and a big, sexy sounding project, that's great. That certainly helps. But it doesn't have to be, I came up with the Pfizer vaccine on my own. Like, it doesn't have to be that. It could also be something as smaller, like I helped another person that was going to get fired, and I helped them not get fired. Or, what I mean, like I helped one person get up the mountain. Even though my mountain was smaller compared to everyone else on absolute terms, it was actually pretty big for me. And I'll say, I think there's an example that I like to cite this example a lot because I love it. I know this is not the Stanford discussion, but Kirsten Moss, the head of Stanford, I went to visit Stanford a couple of years ago, and she gave a presentation for admissions consultants, and she said that, for example, there's this idea that like, oh, you can't get into one of these schools if you didn't go to an Ivy League, hoity-toity, IIT, MIT, Caltech, whatever. And she was like, no, some of the best students we've accepted in the past couple of years went to community college, but when they were in community college, they were like, this guy was like student body president and started a new scholarship fund. And, like they were only, so to speak, in the grand scheme of people being snooty, they were only going to a community college. But when they were in that community college, holy smokes, they were able to transform it. Right. And I think one of the recommendations was like from like the dean of the, like, oh my God, this person is, as president of student body, like implemented all these changes. Conversely, you could be the president of the student body at a hoity-toity college. But if you just sit back and don't really do anything, and you're like, whatever, I was elected and then I hung out for a year and I didn't do much, guess what? You're not going to get as much credit. They are going to look at the context you're in, the opportunities that you've been given, and what have you done with the opportunities that you have been given. So it doesn't all have to be about the absolute size of the mountain. It's all contextualized. So since it's your job to tell them about which particular mountains you've faced and how you have influenced others for the better in terms of moving, scaling, or descending the mountain, or whatever analogy you want to use, the main places for you to do this is going to be in the resume, the little boxes in the application form. So if you have not yet dug into the application forms, here's a heads up. Every school has the application form, and in the application form, it'll say something like, it'll say something like, describe your biggest challenge at work, or describe your biggest responsibility at work. Excuse me, I need to take a drink of water. Hold on. I am so sorry about that. All of a sudden, I inhaled a piece of dust or something, and I was like, "Oh, I can't talk anymore." Excuse me. So, as I was saying, in the application form, there'll be a little box that says something like, "Describe your biggest accomplishment at work. Describe your responsibilities. Describe your biggest challenge at work." So, on top of the essays that you need to write, be aware of the fact that for every school, you also need to write a couple of sentences describing those things. Look, that's important for all schools, but for HBS, it takes on a particularly strong and particularly high amount of importance, and I'll explain why in a second. So those little boxes in the application form, don't just save them for the last minute and then sprint through them and don't give them a second thought. They're actually pretty important. And then finally, of course, the all famous essay. So it's really important to know that HBS, more so than any other school, I think, really, really values brevity. And I made myself laugh yesterday when I was like, brevity / being concise. And yes, I realize that I'm not being concise by saying brevity / being concise, but they really are a school that values brevity. And we know this because since they are looking for people who are going to become powerful leaders often have to be powerful communicators. The case method requires brevity, impactful discussion, but also you're not allowed to take 100 hours to describe. You only get about 10 seconds to make your point. And what's interesting about the evolution of the application is that when I applied to HBS, they had 6 essays. And then they went down to, I think, 3, and then it was 2, and now it's 1. And for several years, it's been just that 1. And if they felt that they weren't getting enough from that 1 essay, they would have changed it. So they would have gone back and added more essays. So clearly they are happy with just the 1 essay. More on this next week. We're going to talk about the interview next week, but HBS's interview is unlike any other school's interview. It also really emphasizes brevity. So let's think about the essay. The essay is basically, as we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy? There are a few keywords I want to highlight here. One is, as we review your application, the word application, and also what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy? And basically what this is saying is, as we review the other parts of your application, being the resume and those little boxes I was just talking about, what is it about you that we need to know that is not already covered in the resume or these little boxes? So when you are approaching your Harvard application, I want you to start by writing your resume. Then I want you to start by writing in those little boxes for the application form. Then when that's done, read through those materials and then ask yourself, what else do they need to know that is not already covered? Do not repeat yourself. The biggest mistake you could possibly make for the Harvard application is, let's say your resume, you've had 2 jobs since college, and when you were in college, you were the captain of the rugby team. If your HBS essay is, when I was in college, I was the captain of the rugby team. It was great to play rugby, and I had a lot of fun with my teammates. Then I went to this job where I did blah, 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 blah. Then I went to this other job. If you just basically take your resume and write it out in a story format, no, complete waste of time. One thing that sets HBS apart from some other schools is that they have only professional readers. They don't have some other schools. You might have a second-year student. They might have second-year students doing one or both of the initial read-throughs. Harvard pretty much has like professional readers, many of whom have gone to HBS. So the person reading your resume is not an idiot. So if you say, if your bullet point is like, led a team of 5 to launch a new product, and then in the essay you say, I'll never forget the time that I led a team of 5 to launch a new product. We did step 1, step 2, step 3, and those steps are just like really obvious things that anyone launching a new product would do. It's like, oh, what a waste of time. I'm pretty, I, as an HBS admissions reader, I'm pretty smart. I myself have usually, not always, but I frequently, as a reader, have an MBA myself from Harvard Business School. So you don't have to like treat me like I'm dumb. So really, if you maximize that resume and you maximize how you phrase things in the application form, your essay, the brevity aspect of it will not hopefully bother you so much because you can cover a lot in those little boxes. So super quick, just in terms of like overall sort of tips for the resume and the application forms. So all resumes for business school have to focus on leadership, obviously, and I have done resume webinar, the resume webinar for GMAT Club that you can probably find somewhere out there if you want some of my advice on that. But for HBS in particular, especially because they get 10,000, I think they get the most number of applicants, at least for US schools. I believe they get the most number of applications per year, I think. So about 10,000 people a year. So you don't have a lot of time. It's a school that values brevity, and also they don't have a lot of time. So the wow factor really has to be clear right up front, right at the beginning of the bullet point, to grab their attention and pique their interest. As if, like, don't try to be mysterious. Or I've had some people say to me like, Maria, I have this one really cool thing that I did, but I don't think I'm going to put it in my essay for Harvard, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to save it for the interview. And then that way in the interview, I can spring it. And I'm like, dude, don't take that chance. You might not get to the interview if you're not conveying the full breadth of your leadership in the application. So you're going to want that impact to be clear right up front. And in the application form text field, make sure that the size of that mountain that you were pushing, like why it was difficult, make sure that that's very clear, because an outsider might not understand the internal politics that were involved, for example, and that your results are very clear. And please do not never copy and paste the resume bullet points and just paste them into that box. Never. And write in a more conversational way. Please have some empathy and some sympathy for your admissions reader. Do not say something like, I maximized synergies by leveraging corporate, but no, boring, right? Grab their attention and tell it the way you would tell it to them if they were a stranger you had met at a party, at a cocktail party. So just a heads up, in Applicant Lab, I actually have a lot of advice for how to go through both the recommendations and the application form. Which brings us to the essay. So once you've done as much as you can in the resume and application form, that brings us to the essay. So here are some high-level tips. Now that we've covered what HBS is looking for, and you know that they're looking for people who move mountains, who do it through other people, who have influence and impact beyond themselves, and now that you filled out the other parts of the application form, you need to ask yourself, okay, what else do they need to know about me so that I can prove to them that I have a habit of leadership? And that I not only move mountains, but that I've done it in a way that they are going to like. Because again, nobody wants some sort of like military dictator style leader who is, maybe you move a mountain, but if you killed half of your team to do it, or everyone quit because they hate you, not the best, right? So not only have you moved the mountain, but also have you done it, but how have you done it? So don't repeat yourself. Tell the story as clearly as possible, but also as briefly as possible. And let's think about more specifically, again, I'm going to zoom in on one of the words or one of the little sections of the question. What else would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy to Harvard Business School? Specifically, what else do we need to know as we think about letting you into our school, which is a business school, and it is a school that deals with business? So it's not about saying, well, I want to become a great, I don't know, government leader. That's cool, but you're applying to the wrong program, right? Or I mean, you might be able to say, I'm going to do the joint HKS, HBS degree, but this is not about you sharing with them all kinds of things about yourself in the hopes that they're going to grab onto something that they like about you. They are considering your candidacy to HBS, not are you a good person? Are you a likable person? Are you an impressive person? It's like, are you going to be the sort of person that we want in our classroom? So the question is not phrased, what else would you like us to know as we consider becoming your therapist or absolving you of your mortal sins? This is not a confessional. Sometimes people are like, oh, what else you should know about me is that when I was 6 years old, I stole a candy bar from a shop. And it's like, just come on. It might be a fun story about you, but does it help bolster the argument for your candidacy to Harvard Business School? Might not. You're not trying to impress my mother. You're not trying to marry me. So this isn't about you sort of boasting about like, here are all the accolades I've ever won in my life. And I'm number 1 at this, and I'm number 2 at this, and I came in the top 5% in that. Like, no, it's not like a pageant like that. And this is also not about, along the same lines, about like were you a 12-year-old who won a spelling bee, or as a 15-year-old, you won a math competition, or, when I was 7, I took apart my family's DVD player because I wanted to know how it worked. Oh my God, that's so overdone. And it doesn't matter because you're kind of an adult now. So it's one thing to show a habit of leadership, but that doesn't mean that you go all the way back and you're like, here are the 7, when I was 7 years old, I won a soccer award or football award for being the best athlete on my 7-year-old athlete team. Like, no, please, I get it, but just don't do it. And if you remember, this is me last week. It took me quite a while to find a still of, one thing I noticed as I was trying to find like a screenshot is that I close my eyes a lot when I talk. And so there were a lot of like images of me going like, so anyway, so this is our last little session. And the things that make for someone being good in the case method is also what makes for somebody writing a good essay. So part of why they value concision is because you need it to be good in the case method. And also, if you're bad in the case method discussion, it's usually because someone is sort of arrogant and full of themselves or really boring. And so if somebody applies with this attitude of like, today is your lucky day, dear reader, because you have been blessed with the opportunity to read about me and my accomplishments. You're so lucky, lucky you. Oh my God, no, never. And I understand, I get it, right? Because I've just told you like, oh my God, it's 9% acceptance rate. And most people are qualified to get in. Maybe 70%-ish off the top of my head, I think are probably qualified to get in. So, if it's so competitive as you say, Maria, then the solution is obviously for me to make the essay about like, look at how amazing I am. Everything I do is perfect. I've never made a mistake, and I'm like the best person who's ever existed. So you have to be someone who's accomplished cool stuff, but you don't have to have been perfect. In fact, if you pretend to be perfect, it's going to backfire, because in fact, a lot of us have learned our best lessons from failure or from mistakes or from an initial misstep that then we had to course correct. But boy, oh boy, did we learn from that. And boy, oh boy, did that make us a better leader when it comes to working with other people. So don't feel that the essay, please don't have it be like, well, let me tell you about how you should be so impressed with me because I speak 4 languages. And first of all, they're like, ugh, gross. Like, you're making me throw up with your arrogance. But also, like, it's the Harvard Business School applicant pool. Do you think that there are a lot of people in this applicant pool that speak 4 languages? So before you start bragging, realize that there are some people in the applicant pool who actually have convinced governments to change policies that invest, so hold your roll, slow your roll there, cowboy. But also, like, even if that is who you are and you're like, Maria, the thing is, I actually am perfect, then gross. Then my advice to you is pretend to not be that person. You're going to have to fake it. You're going to have to fake some humility in the application process. And people do it all the time. Trust me, I had some people in my section at HBS who were insufferably full of themselves. And they must have like pretended to be nice people in the application and in the interview. It's not a perfect process, so they still got in. But if you are very obviously full of yourself, and it's okay. If anything, like we're always course correcting, we're always growing as people. And so showing that you have a growth mindset is actually not a bad thing. And in fact, can make for really, really compelling essays, because I can see this habit of leadership. I can see how you've grown, how you stuck with something that maybe at first you made a mistake with, but then you stuck with it, and then you changed how you approached it, and then it all worked out. So please don't be arrogant. And I know this is like a cultural difference thing, because I know that in some countries in particular, bragging is not seen as being distasteful. It's seen as being like, it's like breathing, right? Like, well, of course, if I was in the top 2% of all people who took the whatever entrance exam in my country, like, of course I would brag about that. Like, why wouldn't you? It's a cultural thing in the US. It's not seen as being pleasant. So for the love of the barfing gnome, please don't do it. And by the way, I do not own this image. This is copyright Disney, Gravity Falls. So please don't sue me if you're watching this and you work for those companies. I am giving them credit. Okay, so I meant for this box to actually be over here on the left, where I'm focusing on the essay advice and the mapping, but I guess I didn't do that. But anyway, the point is, like, these are just some of my biggest tips. If you like this, there's a lot more where that came from over to the left-hand side of this section in the writing, the essay advice, mapping and pre-writing. So I have a lot more stuff to talk about there. I have a lot more examples. I have a whole lot else to walk you through. And so please check it out at applicantlab.com. That's applicantlab.com. And if you've liked this and if you want to support my business, that would mean a lot to me, because that way, if I can make a living through Applicant Lab, I won't have to shut it down and charge $8,000 a person the way other people do. All right. So with that, that is everything I've got. Ooh, look, Abhijit was so worried that I am 42 minutes in. So we have time, I believe, for questions. Now I'm going to start at the top. I may not answer every question, and I will not, I will be less likely to answer a question that's like, hi, if my blood type is AB positive and I have green eyes and I'm left-handed and I have a 730 GMAT, what are my chances of getting, like, if I'm going to be more likely to answer questions that I believe will be of interest to a lot of people. People joining from India. Someone is asking, HBS gives a full tuition fee fellowship for students. What are the eligibility criteria to get that scholarship? So Nikhil Chatti, I answered this actually in last week's session. Actually, HBS very rarely gives full tuition fee fellowships. They expect most people, they see that they are making an investment in you by giving you one of their very, very limited and very, very coveted spots. And so if they're making an investment in you, they expect you to be willing to make an investment in yourself by either paying for a significant amount of the education upfront or taking on loans to do it. So the average person, I don't remember the number now, but I think the average person graduates from Harvard with $80,000 worth of loans. Yes, of course, if you come from a developing nation, you are more likely to get need-based aid, but they very rarely give merit-based aid. So it's not about like, oh, how do I win that scholarship? It's more about like, they look at the past 3 years of your income and other assets that you may have, and they use that to determine it. But they do expect most people to take out a loan just even as a gesture that you're willing to invest in yourself. And if you say, and I think I said this last week, like if you're the sort of person who's like, oh my God, I can't take out $150,000 worth of loans. That's so much money. And what if I can't pay it back? Like if you don't believe in yourself enough that you can pay back $150,000 or $200,000 worth of loans, then you're probably not going to be the sort of mountain mover that HBS is looking for anyway. So Elon Musk is the wrong example to give here. Look, love him or hate him, you cannot deny that Elon Musk has impacted the world. So you might not like him. I am not going to offer an opinion on him one way or the other, but Elon Musk has changed the world. So that's my response to you, Bang. I probably, I don't know how much you've changed the world, but I would say that love him or hate him, he's done a lot to impact the world. Do HBS have some toll gates for higher experience or age? Yeah, so if you are 15 years of experience and age 35, there's no official toll gate. Every admissions officer from every school will tell you, go ahead and apply no matter what, because it's in their best interest to increase the number of applications as much as possible to get those acceptance rates down so that they look more and more elite. So no admissions officer will ever say to you, you're not getting in. But the fact is that for someone who is 35 years old, at that point, you're sort of stuck in two different ways. If you're 35 and you've only accomplished what other people in the applicant pool have accomplished at age 25, it's going to be like, okay, so is this person really someone who has that upward momentum in their careers? If it took them 10 years longer to get to this point in their, let's say this point in their careers, and other people in our applicant pool got that same point in their careers at age 25, maybe the 35-year-old is not the sort of person that we're looking for in terms of the sort of person who has the jet fuel, the Harry Potter, again, from last week's session, like who's like already on that broom, ready to take off and play Quidditch and become a Quidditch champion. So if you're 35 and you haven't accomplished enough, you're not competitive. Conversely, if you're 35 and you have accomplished a lot, then the question becomes, well, what are you going to get out of Harvard? Like, are you really going to learn a lot from your 26-year-old classmates who have not nearly accomplished as much as you have? So in that case, they might want to push you to consider their AMP program, which is for, they have various residential executive programs. Like I think the AMP program is 9 months long. So it's like roughly half the duration of an MBA, but they smush a lot into it. And it's also part to like, they're doing you a favor too, because for you to learn a lot, the way how the case method works is that you learn from other people. And so you will be giving them a lot of knowledge if you're super accomplished, but you won't be getting it in return just because people are going to be younger than you and less accomplished than you, right? So the value proposition for someone who's 35 and is very accomplished is actually not that great. So the people that I've seen who are like successful, 35 is a bit much. So I did have someone who did get in, I think at 32, but this was someone who was all the way on that biggest mountain. This was someone who was managing all of Europe for a major, pretty famous household name consumer electronics brand. It was a P&L of 200 million and a staff of 2,000. And they had turned around one of the territories from like a -8 loss in 1 year to a +12 gain the next year. So this was someone who was really like amazing. And in this case, they were a little bit older because they were from a country that had required military service. So that was part of why they were older. And also their company was sponsoring this person's MBA. So the company was paying for it. And the company CEO said, I think this young man has the potential to become the next eventually become the CEO of this somewhat large. I mean, it wasn't Apple. It wasn't Samsung, but it was a very large consumer electronics company. And so when the CEO says, I think this person is going to become the CEO one day, and we believe in him so much that we're paying for his MBA, then yes, that person was on the older side and they did get into Harvard, because guess what? The chances of that person being on the cover of Fortune magazine is pretty high. But just realize that it's not a gate, but it is a bar, and it's a harder bar to cross the older you get. I use technology to drive change under how to present it like leadership. So hopefully I was able to answer some of that, but I have hours and hours. Like that's what the Applicant Lab product does. It walks you through what are admissions officers looking for? How do you explain your background in a way that they will understand and value. If you're that big at a level 4 or 5, why would you even waste money on an MBA? Oh, bang, that's your choice. If you wouldn't want to get an MBA, then you don't have to. But some people really want to get one. Some people like, first of all, some of them have just been working so hard that they kind of want a bit of a break. Some of them want to develop a very strong network. So, if you go to a Harvard or Stanford, you're going to meet other people who are pretty cool. And so those are going to be people that are going to be in your network for the rest of your life. And so there's something to be said for, I think I actually did a session last year, I want to say, with GMAT Club on the value of a top MBA. And that was one of the biggest ones, was the network. But hey, look, man, if you're already at that level and you don't think an MBA adds any value to you, God bless you. Don't apply. I will say, though, that some people also see that they have been able to intuitively get to where they are without a formal business education. So they have an intuition for how to influence others, and they have an intuition for how to manage others, but they want to learn formally the best practices. Okay, is 5 years work experience right for HBS? So Sahil, it's anywhere from, some people apply right out of college and then they have to wait 2 years and then they get accepted while they're in college, then they have to work for 2 years and then they enroll. 2 years is the minimum. Somewhere between 4 to 6 is kind of the sweet spot. But the number of years is a lot less important than what you've done with those years, right? If we think back to the context of the mountains that you've moved and the challenges you've overcome, that, it's more about the, if you only have 2 years of experience, have you done a lot more than other people who only have 2 years of experience? And if you have 5 years of experience, have you accomplished and influenced a lot more than other people with 5 years of experience? So it's less about like, here's the magic formula. It's not a quantitative thing at all. If you get anything away from these discussions that I'm doing, is that it's not about, that's why profile reviews are sort of a waste of time. Oh, I have a 710 GMAT and a blah, blah, blah from IIT, and I work at Flipkart. And it's like, okay, well, okay, that's good. That's a good start. But there's a whole lot of other information I need to know first. Okay. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's right. You don't need an MBA for anything. Okay. Oh, sorry. I somehow felt like I was scrolling and then I sort of jumped accidentally to the bottom. Sorry, guys. I'm scrolling all the thing to try to find the next. If you have a GMAT score of 700 and you have no special talent but a business idea and want to get more knowledge, no. Sorry, that's what, remember the chicken and the egg? There are many business schools out there who will help you take that little egg of an idea and incubate it into an incredible award-winning chicken. But Harvard's not necessarily the place for that. You have to already have a lot of good stuff on your resume. Just having an idea for a business is really not enough, but there are so many, right off the top of my head, check out Babson. Right? Lots of programs, especially in the past 5 to 10 years, have started really rolling out their entrepreneurship things. And especially for entrepreneurship, you might not even need a fancy MBA, because in that case, it's more about execution of your idea. And you don't have to spend $200,000 to get a really powerful network if you don't need that network to make your business work. Are leisure activity achievements like podcasts and YouTube channels, are they considered worthy? They're nice, but it's not going to move the needle. Unless you can say, I launched this YouTube channel and as a result, we raised $50,000 for children to get vaccinated, or, like something like that. It's more about what was the impact of that action and not what was the action itself. So if you launch a YouTube channel and you have 1 million subscribers, cool. But what have you done with that 1 million subscribers? Have you actually fomented positive change as a result of that? Okay. I'm going to keep going. The synergies between Applicant Lab and a full package MBA consultant? Sure. So a lot of people, some people just use Applicant Lab and that's all they need. Some people use it with my team, or if you want to use it with another consultant here, there's sort of 3 main ways to do it. First of all, a lot of the other overpriced consultants, what they do is they might offer like a 2-hour package or a 3-hour package. So what you could do is you could go through the lab, and instead of buying the $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 comprehensive package from them, you use the lab, and then you just buy like, I don't know, 3 hours from them, right? And then you get like most of the way there, and then you say to them, look, I just want to do. Some of them even offer something called like a pre-submission checkup type of service, where you're like, here's my stuff, I'm sending it to you to look over it, and they spend, say, 2 hours going through it and just highlighting. So like that's one way you could do it. And so that those sort of 2 to 3 hour packages will cost you about $1,000. So $1,000 plus $1,300 versus $4,800 or $5,000, pretty good. And you could also do a one school package with another consultant and then use Applicant Lab plus that consultant to do all the other schools. So if you're applying to say 6 schools, instead of having to buy a 6 school package from them, you just buy a one school package and then you complement it with Applicant Lab. And actually, there have been other people who have in fact purchased a $10,000 or $15,000 application package from another consultant. And so for them, what they think is like, okay, I'm spending so much money and I'm putting all of my eggs into this one. God, what is it with eggs this morning? I even had eggs for breakfast. I'm egg obsessed. Sorry, I put all of my eggs into the basket of this one firm. But this is such a subjective process, and the advice can be so subjective. What's another $300 for me to just like, if they tell me to do this, and I don't really know how I feel about it, I'm already spending $10,000 anyway, $8,000 anyway. What's another $300 to just jump into the lab and see what Maria says and see how, like, if the two things agree, maybe it's pretty good advice. And if they disagree, at least that way, you know. So it's some people view it as an insurance policy. Okay, Nick AA, if you rank the most important part of an application to HBS, what would be the top 5? The most important part of the application is your previous accomplishments. And then how the application exists for you to convey those accomplishments effectively. But, you know, it's not going to take, if someone above, I appreciate the honesty of the earlier commenter who's like, hey, maybe I don't have a lot of accomplishments yet. So what do I do? That, unfortunately, that's not going to really, the best essay in the world is not going to help someone whose profile is not competitive. So I would say a habit of leadership is the most important thing. Previous accomplishments. Is the HBS MBA plus MS program more competitive to get into than the HBS MBA? I believe it is, Akshay. Think about it. You're not only trying to get into one of the hardest business schools in the world to get into, but you're also then trying to get into one of the hardest engineering or biotech schools in the world to get into. So now you need to do both of those things. I think it's difficult. Now, I do think that it's possible for you to apply to both and then for them to say, you know what, you didn't get into the MS program, but we are letting you into the MBA. I don't think it works the other way around, though. I don't think the engineering school would be like, oh, we'll let you in, but you're not getting into the MBA. But I think it's more competitive, right? Because now you're trying to get into 2 really hard programs at once versus 1. So I would really urge you to think about not only how competitive are you as a leader, but how competitive are you now as either a biotech person or as an engineering person. You're having fun. Usually these become gloomy. I know. I think some of them are gloomy, maybe a little boring. I'm trying to avoid that. How to decide if someone will be better suited for an MBA versus an MPP dual degree. So I have to say, I am not a huge fan of dual degrees because I think that the career outcomes are not really that much better. And you're normally spending another year in school and another year's worth of tuition in order to get to the same result that you could have gotten with just 1 or 2 years of schooling. So for me, it's not really worth it. I think you could consider the dual degree if you really, really soberly examine what are the things you want to do, and then you very closely look at the curricula and the course offerings of those different programs. And you say, my gosh, I really, really need finance, accounting, strategy, marketing, but I also really, really need policy, macroeconomic, whatever it is they teach. Like, I need both. I really need to take coursework in both of those things for me to achieve my goals, then do it. I think that in most cases, you don't need both degrees. You could either do the MPP and then just like on your own study some business concepts, or vice versa. Of course, if you are trying to change, make like a big career change from something that has nothing to do with public policy to move into public policy, maybe then having that extra credential will help you make that transition. So in that case, I would urge you to speak to students in both programs. I will say for a lot of people, sometimes people who have backgrounds, say in the nonprofit sector or the social sector or public sector, if I talk to them and they say, well, I want to work in management consulting, you might want to look at an MPP, because the top management consulting firms also recruit from the MPA programs, the public policy programs as well. So if, depending on what your goal is, you might not need the MBA at all. So start digging, asking around and doing your research. You think Elon Musk is a genius technocrat than a general leader? Well, you know, he's built some pretty big companies. So if he was just a genius by himself who wasn't able to ever work with people, no one would ever work with him and he wouldn't have a company. And I don't know, we have a Tesla. My husband has a Tesla and we love it. So it also helps. It helps me like Elon Musk a lot, because I'm like, damn, he made a really nice car. So he didn't do it by himself. He had other people working for him. So, you know, nobody does it by themselves, which is my point. Will a master in international business in France impact my profile as education and work experience, internship from Europe, being okay, I'm sorry. I need to reread this question. Okay. Will a master in international business from France impact my profile from Europe as being a merit for admission? So simply having a master's in business doesn't mean anything one way or the other. Because again, it's more about what has your impact been. Someone might have gotten a master's in international business and then used that education to start a really successful import-export company that is growing quickly and blah, 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 and is doing amazing things. Great. But someone might have also gotten that same degree and then gotten a job as a pencil pusher at a bank and not really doing a whole lot that's impressive. And so, no. So the degree itself isn't really what matters. It's more about like, what have you done with that education? And also, on a lesser extent, what did you do while you were in school in terms of being a leader on campus? That actually often matters more than what do I have this degree or that degree, and I went to France for this, but then I went to Japan for that, and that's not as important. It's more about what you've done, impact. My profile is mostly academically inclined, not much social work, not much creativity, not much entrepreneurship. Is there less of a chance for you to get through to HBS? If you haven't really pushed the boundaries of something, if you haven't really made an impact, then there is less of a chance. But there are lots of other great programs. Again, it's Harvard, not Hogwarts. Like, it's not like, oh, there's only one business school in the world and that's it. Like, there are like hundreds. There are dozens and dozens of really great business schools out there. Come on. But yeah, now that we've talked about what HBS is looking for, you can ascertain a little bit more about how competitive you think you are. I'm going to... Example of leadership during 9 years of entrepreneurial period. You got an angel from an angel investor. I mean, 9 years of entrepreneurship, 9 years of experience is a little bit old for HBS. You got an angel investor. The people, so I'm trying to think off the top of my head of like, who's the most famous entrepreneur, I think, from my year at HBS is Jeremy Stoppelman, who founded a site called Yelp. And before that, he was one of the early employees at PayPal. He was like one of the first 5 employees at PayPal, and then he got to HBS and he founded Yelp. He actually dropped out of HBS to found Yelp, and Yelp today is, I think, a publicly traded company. So if you've been doing this for 9 years and you just now got your first round of angel investment, my gut is that might not be enough progress in 9 years, but there are so many other good programs. Oh my God, like UT Austin, for example, another one off the top of my head that's very good with entrepreneurship. Are HBS always looking for unicorns? I mean, not always. Obviously, like I said, it's a spectrum. So obviously there are people, if you're all like the left-hand side of the spectrum, those folks almost never get in. People who just do sort of like bare minimum, they are nice people, they are kind, conscientious, hard workers. Any company would be lucky to have them. But if they've just sort of done the bare minimum with their lives and with their jobs, and that, they're just sort of crossing the T's and dotting the I's for other people's ideas, then probably not. But the unicorns, I would say, are maybe 2% of the applicant pool. And it's a 9% acceptance rate. So mere mortals have to get in also. It's not just about being like amazing. Should a person have huge impact in one field or a little or lesser impact in a wide variety of fields? I mean, if you can, the more the merrier, I guess. If you have a habit of leadership, wouldn't you be the sort of person who does it in your personal life and in your work life? Because if you can't help yourself but get involved, if you can't help yourself but be like, oh my gosh, this process is so outdated, and oh my gosh, like this presentation is so lame, like we need to spice it up, and whatever it is, like you're going to be that sort of person. It's not like you're not that person 8 hours a day, but you are that person another 8 hours a day. Like they're looking for people who are like that all the time. So I wouldn't say like one is better than the other, because I don't know how do you plan your life saying I'm going to make a strong impact in one field versus I'm going to make a little bit less impact, but admit like it's more about showing that you're someone who does it. And I would need more details on which one, which one you're talking about. Is GMAT doesn't matter at all? No, the GMAT matters a lot. If you don't do well in the GMAT, so I'm sorry if you're a regular Maria viewer, or if you like listen to my podcasts and stuff, you've heard me say this before, so apologies to you. Test optional does not mean brain optional. So this past year, a bunch of programs said you don't need to submit a GMAT because the GMAT's all screwy because of COVID. And so, yeah, the GMAT score is certainly not it's the bottom of that pyramid, right? But if you don't have a strong GMAT score, you need to prove that you have a brain some other way through your undergraduate transcript, usually is the number one way. So it's not that the GMAT doesn't matter. It's just that like everyone applying, not everyone, but most people applying have between, let's say, a 680 and an 800. Most people who are successful have somewhere above a 700 to 760, 750. So it's like a little distribution curve. It's not that the GMAT doesn't matter. It's just that it's certainly like someone with a 780 who just sits around and plays video games, not getting in. What do I mean by good stuff in resume? So there's a whole webinar on Applicant Lab resume tips that you can see right here on this GMAT Club channel somewhere. And you can also check it out at Applicant Lab. I'm a second officer in the Merchant Navy. You have good leadership, but does being from a diversified field have a chance? I think, Kush, the question or the issue would be, why does Kush need to come to Harvard to achieve his goals? So it's more like, what have you, so you have leadership experience, but then what are you going to do with this degree to like go to move forward? And so maybe it's something about like working for a defense contractor or some sort of a business that sells to the military. So being from a diversified field can definitely be helpful, but realize that you're also then competing against the US military people, and that's a military system that they're going to be a little bit more familiar with, as opposed to, the military is sort of difficult to understand enough. It's opaque enough as it is to then also understand what does it mean to be a second officer in the Merchant Navy. Kush, I would say maybe public policy schools might be a good thing for you to look into also. Speaking of public policy, right? Because you've been in the military, that's a government public type of thing. And so they might be more amenable to the fact that you not only have leadership, but that you've also been doing it in the sort of the public sphere as opposed to more of a business sphere. Why HBS? I want to start a pharmaceutical tech company, and I wanted to know, is my goal worthy? Your goal has nothing to do with, it's not about having a worthy goal. It's about having a worthy profile. Do I know if HBS will allow for visits this coming summer, or is there an incentive to visit? I don't know yet about visits this summer. There is no incentive to visit. There are many schools where you should visit to show them that you love them, but Harvard and Stanford are not those schools. They don't care. Because Harvard specifically doesn't want to, they want it to be a level playing field. And so if somebody has the money or the time or both to go visit the campus, why should that person have an advantage over someone who might not have as much money or might not be able to take that much time off of work? So I think for you as an applicant, it's beneficial to go visit the school, because then, but not to see it in the summer because no classes will be happening. So it's more beneficial if, like, you really, by the way, you can see videos of the case method on YouTube. They've actually taped some of it and put it up there. It's more about like you seeing like, where do I think I'll fit? For me, if I had like a certain budget of money and time, I would wait to see where I get in, and then I would visit the schools that I get into to get a sense of which one I like. It will not help your application though. Other schools, absolutely. Most other schools in the top 10, they view you going to visit them as a sign that you really love them. And as I have said in other webinars, until you get into a program, every school is your first choice. And you have to treat every school like it's your first choice, because they have to believe that they're your first choice, because then you're more likely to get in, but HBS doesn't care. I've never heard of another merchant officer get into HBS. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a hard story to sell, because I don't know what job opportunities would be available afterwards. And if HBS is a program that requires most people to take out $50, $100, $200,000 worth of loans, it's like, oh, can we place this person? So those are sort of if you go back to see my Adcom Hierarchy of Needs video, which is also one that's somewhere floating around on this GMAT Club YouTube channel, you'll see that the thinking about like, okay, what kind of career is this person going to have? What kind of, not just in the long term, but also in the short term, like who's going to hire this person? Which one of our recruiters is going to hire? This is things they're thinking about. And so it might be a little bit hard for them to get a sense of like, well, what, we like this guy. It's not that you're not a good person. It's not that you're not awesome, but just like, what if he graduates and then he can't get a job? So it's just tougher. Is there a way to connect with me directly and discuss my profile? There's a way to connect with me indirectly, and that's to purchase ApplicantLab.com, and you'll get lots of videos. And then after that, you can, I'm not available right now for personal reasons, but later in the summer, I will be available for hiring for additional things. But you must go through the Applicant Lab platform first, because I don't like repeating myself. So it makes me grumpy. If I have a video that says, don't do this in your Harvard essay, and then you send me a Harvard essay that does the thing I told you not to do, it makes me grumpy. So I said what not to mention for what else should we know about you. What kind of answer should we give for this question? So Sevilla, I have 3 hours worth of videos. Like I've been talking right now for 1 hour. I think I've got over 3. Like it's the hardest question. Well, it's not as hard as what matters most to you and why. Well, anyway, it's tied for the hardest essay question in MBA admissions. And if it were easy enough to just give all of the advice that I have in an hour, then neither I nor any admissions consultant in the world would have a job, because it would be, if it were so easy to do, everyone would just do it and they wouldn't need any more guidance. So I have again, I haven't seen, it's like 3.5 hours, I think. Does HBS need job experience, or will any universities ask? So most MBA, any MBA program that is good will ask you to have work experience. So if an MBA program lets you in and they're like, no work experience needed, you should be very suspicious, because they probably do not have good career outcomes. Because why would a company go to an MBA program and hire someone without experience when they could go to another MBA program and hire someone who has 5 years of experience and who has managerial experience and who has managed budgets and has managed teams? Like, which one would you rather hire? So when MBA programs let you in without any work experience, I would be very suspicious. So that's why the MBA programs usually require it. They require it because, number one, you need to show that you're a leader. You can't do that if you haven't really worked. And also the recruiters are going to be like, why? I came here to hire management talent who are grown-ups, not to hire fresh graduates. who shouldn't do an MBA? Yeah, people get into business school and they decide not to go. Kinshuk, you have to start asking lots of questions. Start now, reaching out to students, reaching out to alumni, pros, cons. There is no black or white answer. Like, it's not like medical school. Like, if you wanted to become a neurosurgeon, you have to go to medical school. But if you want to become a business person, you don't have to get an MBA. So the more you ask other people, like, was it worth it? Are you glad you did it? Was it 2-year? Did you really have to do a 2-year program, or would a 1-year program, would that have been enough? You start asking those questions and you'll find out what makes the most sense for you. My GMAT's a 3, but my GPA is a 3, but GMAT's a 740. So the good news for you is that it does seem to balance out. The good news is that having a lower GPA can be balanced out by a higher GMAT. And also, not all GPAs are created equal. So a GPA in something easy, like the humanities, a 3.0 in something easy will not be as well respected as a 3.0 in something like physics, physics theory, theoretical neurophysics. I'm making up words right now. So if it's a really hard major, they're more forgiving of lower grades. In a really hard major, they're also more forgiving of lower grades in a school that curves the grade. In other words, if the school does it so that, like, it's not possible for everyone to get an A, where the top 10% get an A, and then in that case, that also they're more forgiving. So the GPA itself is a really hard number to get around. So your GMAT seems solid. So now you would move up that pyramid of the hierarchy of needs. But I think you might have cleared that first hurdle. Is fighting and winning a consumer case on your own against a dealer say anything about pushing the envelope? Sit on. I'd have to know more. Are you saying, like, you bought a car and then that car was a terrible car, and so that it shows that you have initiative, but the impact is pretty small. You only impacted yourself. So if you think about the scope of impact, mean like yourself, your immediate team, your broader company, outside the company, and then beyond, it's kind of a small impact. So I don't know that would really move the needle. Harvard is known for healthcare. I'll get a product manager role too. Should I continue in healthcare if that adds benefit to my HBS application? So Kinshuk, I'm going to say this for anyone who's listening. Please do not make major life decisions in your life based on what will look good for business schools. That's not a good way to decide major. Like, if you want to be a product manager in healthcare, take the product manager in healthcare job. Don't do it based on, like, what's going to be better for my application, because so many things might happen. I'm guessing from your question that you're still maybe a year or 2 away from applying. You might decide in 2 years that you don't want to get an MBA at all. And so what if you would have taken a job that you hate, or turned down a job that you would have loved for maybe you'll eventually get an MBA? I mean, as I said in other sessions, sometimes people look at the sticker shock and they're like, oh my God, it's 180,000, forget it. And then they don't go. Like, so I would not make major life decisions based on what will business school think about me. That would be like if I pretended to care about NFL football just because maybe in the future my future husband might like football. Like, what a waste of time. What a waste of time for something that hypothetically may or may not happen. So don't take the job that you love and that you're passionate about. And if you love it and you're passionate about it, you're going to excel, and you're not going to be able to help yourself. You're going to start making positive impact. So coincidentally enough, you will probably be a stronger candidate if you do something you're passionate about and you love. So I would say that is international exposure a deciding factor. It helps because a lot of companies reserve international assignments for their most promising talent. So it can often be seen as a sign that your company has a lot of faith in you and they're willing to invest in you, but it's not a requirement. It is a requirement for INSEAD. Do not waste your time applying to INSEAD if you don't have international stuff. What are some of the profile requirements for deferred MBA? So Yash, I'm actually about to publish a huge blog post on deferred MBAs. So be on the lookout for that at my website. with the deferred MBA, since you have a lot less work experience to go on, the academic profile does become more important because they have a lot less data to go on. And so most deferred applicants have much stronger GPAs than the broader applicant pool. And they normally, if we think about what leadership means, maybe they haven't been able to be a leader at a corporation because they haven't graduated yet, but maybe they've had a campus, a government, a student government position where they've made a lot of impact. I've seen a lot of people who start businesses in college have success. It's not a requirement, but it helps. Or other people, another person that I got and I helped get into the deferred MBA program at Stanford had worked essentially full time for a company for 3 years during college, and it helped expand that company into new international markets while getting his college degree and getting a 4.0 in college. So that was a great, when you look at that person's work accomplishments, even if he would have done these accomplishments after graduating, he would have been a really competitive candidate. But the fact that he did them while he was getting his undergraduate degree, game over, man. It was not a slam dunk 100% certainty, but I was like, oh yeah, you're getting in somewhere good. How does HBS judge if you're a good candidate for the case method? So everywhere. That's why the brevity and having really good communication skills in your application form and essay matter. That's why the interview is what it is. I'm going to talk about that next week. Any advice for non-IITians? Reach out to the South Asian group at these schools and ask, or you look on LinkedIn. You don't have to go to IIT. I've helped people from BITS Pilani and, oh God, no, I'm not going to remember. University of Delhi? Don't quote me on that. It's been a long year. So you don't have to go to IIT though. Someone is waiting for my advice for 30 years. Folks, Sonia, I actually answered that question, sorry, but I talked about someone who did get in at age 32. I believe they were managing, remember, they were managing all of Europe, and the CEO was like, I think this guy might be the CEO of this billion-dollar company in 20 years, and we like him so much we're paying. Remember that guy? I covered that question already, so rewind. How does having dual careers factor into the admissions process? You're a consultant at a tech company, but also professional. Being a professional musician is fun. It's great. It's cute. It's certainly not a lot of professional IT consultants are also musicians, but it's interesting. Like I said, it might make you a better date. Right? Like my husband is a musician in his spare time, and I find it very attractive, in fact. So it might help you get a date, but if we remember back to several slides ago, the purpose is not for you to be good mating material. The purpose is what should we consider as we consider your candidacy for Harvard, not as we consider your candidacy for marriage. So being a musician is interesting. It's better than not having any hobbies at all, but it's not, unless you're like, oh, I'm a musician and I started a thing where I go and I play music at old folks' homes, or I play music at children's cancer wards to help, kids feel better as they go through chemotherapy. Like, okay, then in that case, you're using your music to make an impact on others. So it's nice, but by itself, it's not going to really move the needle. But and again, I'm talking like I'm talking Harvard, Stanford, but other schools will like it probably more. BBA admission test. HBS does not have a BBA test. Please use Google. Shout out. I'd encourage you to look up a little bit more. Military officers from international countries. So again, it's not as common just because I think they're not as familiar with it. And also, again, the question of like, whoa, if we let this person in and they graduate with $200,000 worth of debt, what is that career? What are they going to do with this degree? And so will they be able to pay it back? And so do they need the degree from Harvard, or can a degree from, say, ISB or IIM get them, if they want to continue making impact in India, maybe that's a better fit for them. So it's a tougher, I'm not going to lie, it's a tougher thing to ascertain. And then so e-sport of extracurriculars. So whatever, again, same thing. It's an interesting hobby. Personally, I prefer the musician over the e-sport player, but that's just me. You're not trying to date me. But it's an extracurricular. It's not, is it impacting other people? Are you making a positive impact on people besides yourself with this? And I don't just mean like your teammates, like, oh, we all play Fortnite together and we won a Fortnite championship. Like, that's not really what I mean by positive impact. But if you, let's say someone who loves esports, if they, I don't know, use their love of esports to start a tutoring thing for kids to teach them code, like if you use that to like try to make other people's lives better, then great. But otherwise, it's just like, meh. And then I think I'm going to wrap it up in just a second. It's hard to get. Okay, so Siddhant, you went to a law school. 7's the maximum GPA, but it's really hard to get 7. This is exactly where, first of all, in your resume, instead of saying my GPA was 5.2 out of 7, because that doesn't look great, instead, if you were high up in your class, say top 10% of class, right? Because I might not know how to ascertain whether or not a 5 point whatever out of 7, is that good? Is that bad? I might not know, but I know that top 5% of class is good. So if you went to some university with like a weirdo grading system, number one, put it in terms of class rank on the resume. Number two, you can always have the optional essay just to say really quickly, like, my university, the maximum is 7, but nobody gets a 7. The average GPA is a 4.2. I had a 5.5. I was in the top 2%. So you can explain that. So I wouldn't worry about what does the number mean and how do I calculate it. Where am I next? Should I consider applying if you have less than 3 years of work experience? Most people are not ready at 3 years in terms of, so 3 years, you can totally get in at 3 years. Absolutely. Especially, look, if you've worked at McKinsey or if you're at Bain Capital or one of the other PE firms, yeah, you can get in with 2 or 3 years of experience. But it's harder because the bar, you're being compared against the other people who also have 3 years of experience. And so it tends to be, just like with the deferred action people, they tend to rely more on traditional indicators, things like GPA, GMAT. Those things will matter more because you don't have as much other data or evidence to go on. So most people, I don't feel, are ready at 3 years. Just because they might have a ton of potential. They just haven't had the opportunities yet to show it. So the good news is, though, if you apply at 3 years, the worst they can say is no, and then you can just reapply a year or two later. They don't really penalize. I mean, obviously, if you apply like every single year for 5 years, that's annoying, but they're not going to penalize you if you apply, say, 3 years out and then it doesn't work, and then you try again 1 or 2 years later. It's not bad. So you might as well give it a try if you think you can contribute a lot. Why Harvard and why MBA fit within the application? Godwin, I have my own unique take on this, and I cover that in Applicant Lab. So if you want to check that out, you can, and realize that my advice differs from other people's. But I have been doing this I'm entering my 18th year of admissions consulting. So I'll put it this way, Godwin, remember that I said that Harvard does not like repetition in the application form, and they give you a little box of 500 characters to discuss your career goals. If they wanted to know more than that, they would give you more than 500 characters. So take that hint, wink, wink, for what it is. And then, should I wait for work? Yeah, you have to work. Leo, you have to get work experience again. And especially, yeah, we've already talked about it. You haven't moved any mountains yet, so how can you get into a school that values moving mountains? An ideal perfect for making it to the 2+2 program. I don't know, Sanjay, if you were here a few minutes ago. I'm about to do a blog post on it, so check out my website. How much weight is given to undergraduate prestige? So Justin, I actually literally gave a community college example earlier in the presentation. Prestige, it doesn't matter where you've been so much. Like if you went to community college, that's not a bad thing. As long as you have made the most of the opportunities you've been given, you will be judged within the context of the opportunities that you've been given. So it helps to go to a fancy school, but that's because people who tend to be overachievers in high school, who then go to a fancy school and continue to be overachievers, they show that quote unquote habit of leadership over many years, but some people just don't have the opportunity to go to a fancy school, and they're very sensitive to that. So that's nothing. I wouldn't worry about that. And I think at this point I am going to end. I see some other questions trickling in. When is the blog post going to go up? I don't know, Sanjay, give me a couple days. It'll be up. now that I've publicly talked about it, I'm like, oh shoot, now I need to get it up instead of just having it in my drafts folder where it's been sitting for a month and a half. Okay, fine, Sanjay. I will try to get it up by the end of the week. How's that? I'll do my best. Little what a pinky promise. I'll try my best. Okay, and so that's all I have time for today. Hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. Start thinking about what is HBS looking for, what are the different parts of the application, and how do you start to use them as puzzle pieces so that you don't overlap, because they don't like repetition, and yet convey that leadership. Next week, it'll be a much shorter session on my part because I'm going to talk about the HBS interview. So I'll have a lot less to talk about. And then I guess we can just do the rest with more questions, more Q&A. And then if you've got questions, put them in underneath this video. And also please give me a like. Yay, like. Because I did check out those of you who were here last week and you did write questions and you said, can you give us some examples of like profile stuff or like what is it that they're looking for? I tried to do that today. So questions, put them under and I'll try to address them. All right. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a lot of fun. I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye.